In the frostbitten dawn of November 7, 2008, a mother's world shattered in the shadow of Montana's Bitterroot Mountains. Diane Carver stood at the edge of a gravel lot, her breath visible in the frigid air, clutching a thermos of coffee that had long gone cold. Her 4 sons, Wyatt, 28, Nolan, 26, Levi, 24, and Tucker, 22, had left for a hunting trip in the vast, rugged wilderness of the Bitterroot National Forest. It was a family tradition, a ritual of brotherhood etched into their lives since they were boys trailing their father's boots through the snow. They were experienced hunters, raised on these lands, their rifles as familiar as their own hands. They promised to be back by sundown, their truck loaded with stories and maybe a mule deer. But as the sun sank behind the jagged peaks, casting an orange glow over the silent forest, the brothers didn't return. Diane waited, her heart a tightening knot, until the stars burned cold in the sky. By midnight, her calls to their phones went straight to voicemail, swallowed by the mountain's indifference. The Bitterroot, with its endless ridges and hidden ravines, had claimed her boys, leaving no trace but a mother's dread. 5 years later, on a crisp October morning in 2013, a lone figure stumbled out of those same woods, gaunt and wild-eyed, carrying a secret so terrible it would unravel everything. Diane's hands shook as she dialed the Forest Service, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her chest. Her sons knew these woods like a second home. Wyatt, the eldest, was a paramedic, meticulous, always packing extra supplies. Nolan, the quiet one, could track a deer through a storm. Levi, the joker, had a survivalist's knack for improvisation. Tucker, the youngest, was the sharpshooter, his aim as steady as his loyalty to his brothers. They weren't reckless city folk. They were born of this land, raised on its rhythms. The idea of them getting lost was unthinkable. Yet, as the clock ticked past 1 a.m., Diane knew something was catastrophically wrong. She drove to the trailhead where their blue Ford pickup sat untouched, its hood cold, their gear still stowed in the bed. The Forest Service dispatched a ranger, Cole Ramsey, a man with deep lines etched into his face from years of searching these mountains. He took one look at the truck, its keys still in the ignition, and felt a familiar weight settle in his gut. The Bitterroot was a labyrinth of steep canyons and dense pine, where a misstep could mean a 200-foot drop or a night exposed to sub-zero cold. A search was launched by dawn, a small army of rangers, volunteers, and tracking dogs fanning out from the trailhead. The brothers had planned a 3-mile loop to a ridge known for deer, a route they'd hunted dozens of times. But the trail yielded nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no dropped gear. The forest was a wall of silence, its dense canopy blocking even the helicopter's view. Diane stood at the command post, her eyes scanning the horizon, whispering prayers into the wind. By day 3, the search expanded, pulling in teams from Idaho and volunteers from local ranches. They scoured ravines, checked abandoned cabins, and shouted into the void. The brothers' rifles, their packs, their bright orange vests, none were found. Cole Ramsey, who'd seen lost hikers turn up shivering but alive, felt the case slipping into the realm of the unexplainable. The brothers were equipped, skilled, together. How could 4 men vanish without a trace? On day 5, a volunteer found a single clue, a torn scrap of orange fabric caught on a thorn bush a half-mile off the planned route. It matched the vests the brothers wore, but it was weathered, as if it had been there longer than a few days. The discovery sent a jolt through the search team, but it led nowhere. The trail went cold, and the fabric became a cruel tease, a question with no answer. Weeks turned into months, and the search scaled back. Diane refused to leave Montana, renting a small cabin near the forest, walking the trails herself, calling her sons' names until her voice grew hoarse. The public's interest faded, replaced by whispers of theories: a bear attack, a fall into a hidden crevice, or worse, a deliberate disappearance. The brothers' tight bond made the last theory feel like a betrayal to Diane, who knew they'd never abandon each other, or her. The case became a ghost story, a cautionary tale told by locals over beers in Missoula bars. Diane's hope never wavered, but it grew heavy, a weight she carried alone. Then, on October 12, 2013, a hiker spotted a man staggering along a remote Forest Service road, his clothes ragged, his face unrecognizable under a matted beard. He was barefoot, his feet bloodied, clutching a rusted hunting knife. When rangers reached him, he collapsed, muttering a single name: Wyatt. It was Wyatt Carver, the eldest brother, alive after 5 years. His eyes, once steady and warm, were haunted, darting like a trapped animal's. At the hospital, he was malnourished, his body scarred, his mind fractured. Diane rushed to his side, tears streaming as she held his hand, but his words were disjointed, feverish. He spoke of a cave, a shadow, a choice that broke them. "They're gone," he whispered, "but I know what happened." His story was incomplete, riddled with gaps, but one detail chilled everyone. The brothers hadn't been alone in those woods. Something, or someone, had been with them. Cole Ramsey sat across from Wyatt, notebook in hand, trying to piece together the fragments. Wyatt's return was a miracle, but his secret was a Pandora's box. What he revealed would force Diane to confront a truth more devastating than loss. The Bitterroot had kept its silence for 5 years, but now it was ready to speak. If you're gripped by this mystery, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that uncover the truth. Let's dive deeper into what Wyatt saw. Wyatt's return sent a shockwave through the Bitterroot Valley, a spark of hope and dread that reignited a case long buried under 5 years of snow and silence. At St. Patrick's Hospital in Missoula, Diane sat vigil by his bedside, her hands clasped tightly as if letting go might make him vanish again. Wyatt was a ghost of himself, his once muscular frame reduced to bone and sinew, his skin sallow, his eyes sunken but burning with something unspoken. Doctors noted hypothermia, severe dehydration, and old scars crisscrossing his back, some from wounds that had never properly healed. He spoke in fits, his voice hoarse, as if the mountains had stripped it raw. "The cave," he'd mutter. "We couldn't get out." Then, softer, "They didn't make it." But when pressed about Nolan, Levi, and Tucker, he'd clam up, his gaze drifting to the window where the Bitterroot peaks loomed like sentinels. Ranger Cole Ramsey, now leading a renewed investigation, knew Wyatt's survival was no simple miracle. The knife he'd been clutching, a standard hunting blade, its handle worn but intact, was one of the brothers. Its blade was notched, as if used for more than skinning game. Cole's team scoured the Forest Service road where Wyatt emerged, a remote stretch 12 miles from the brothers' original trail. They found no tracks, no campsite, no sign of where he'd been hiding for half a decade. The Bitterroot's terrain was brutal, steep granite faces, frozen creeks, and forests so thick they swallowed sound. For one man to survive alone, let alone 4, was a puzzle with missing pieces. Diane, desperate for answers, showed Wyatt a photo of the brothers, laughing by a campfire from years before. His reaction was immediate. A flinch, then tears. "I tried," he whispered. "I tried to save them." But save them from what? Cole pushed gently, but Wyatt's memories were a fractured mosaic. Flashes of a storm, a shadow moving in the dark, a scream cut short. The hospital's psych consult suggested trauma-induced amnesia, but Cole wasn't convinced. Wyatt was holding back, guarding a truth too heavy to speak. The investigation pivoted to retracing Wyatt's path. Using the spot where he was found, rangers mapped a 15-mile radius, focusing on areas with caves or overhangs, places that could shelter a man for years. The Bitterroot was riddled with such hideaways carved by glaciers and time, but most were inaccessible without climbing gear. Teams of rangers and volunteers, fueled by Wyatt's return, swept the forest with renewed vigor. They called out names, scanned for signs, and checked every crevice. On day 4 of the renewed search, a ranger named Marla Hensley, a wiry climber with a knack for spotting the unseen, noticed something odd, a faint, unnatural groove in a rock face, half hidden by moss. It was 10 miles from Wyatt's emergence point, in a canyon locals called Widow's Draw. The groove was a scrape, as if something heavy had been dragged across the stone. Nearby, wedged in a crack, was a single .308 bullet casing, the kind the brothers used for their rifles. The casing was tarnished but intact, suggesting it hadn't been exposed to the elements for long. The discovery electrified the team. Cole knelt by the rock, his gloved hand tracing the scrape. It wasn't random, it was deliberate, like a marker. The casing was bagged as evidence, and the area was gridded for a meticulous search. Widow's Draw was a treacherous maze of cliffs and fallen pines, a place even seasoned hunters avoided. If the brothers had veered here, something had gone terribly wrong. Cole's mind churned with theories: a hunting accident, a predator, or something human, intentional. Wyatt's cryptic words, "They're gone," hung like a fog. Diane, briefed daily, clung to the bullet casing's significance. "It's Nolan's," she insisted, recognizing the brand he favored. He was careful, always ejecting his rounds properly. Her certainty drove the team deeper into the canyon. On day 6, Marla's team found a cave, its entrance a low slit beneath an overhang, camouflaged by a curtain of dead vines. It was dry inside, the air stale, the floor littered with pine needles. At the back, half buried in dirt, was a tattered wool blanket, its edges frayed but unmistakably modern. Nearby, scratched into the cave wall, was a crude carving. W.C. Airweight, Wyatt Carver, 2008. Cole's pulse quickened. This was no coincidence. The cave was photographed and forensic techs were called in. The blanket held traces of blood, old but preserved in the dry environment. DNA testing was rushed, and results confirmed it belonged to Wyatt. But there was more. A second blood type, unidentified, suggesting someone else had been there. The carving, the blood, the casing, they were breadcrumbs. But to what? Wyatt, when shown photos of the cave, grew agitated, muttering about the man in the dark. Cole pressed, but Wyatt shut down, his hands trembling. The investigation was no longer just about finding the brothers. It was about what Wyatt wasn't saying. The forest was hiding a story, and Wyatt was its reluctant keeper. If this twist has you hooked, smash that like button and subscribe to uncover more secrets from the wild. Let's keep digging into the truth. The cave in Widow's Draw became the heart of the investigation, a silent witness to whatever had torn the Carver brothers from their lives. Ranger Cole Ramsey stood at its entrance, the chill of the stone seeping through his jacket, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The crude WC-08 carving stared back, a taunt etched by Wyatt's hand, or someone else's. The blood on the blanket, a mix of Wyatt's and an unknown source, suggested a struggle, a wound, or worse. The .308 casing found nearby hinted at a shot fired, but for what? A deer, a threat, or something more sinister? Cole's team combed the cave for days, sifting dirt, cataloging every scrap. They found a rusted tin can, its label long gone, and a single bootlace knotted and frayed. Both were bagged, but they offered no clear answers. The cave was a dead end, a chapter with missing pages. Back at the hospital, Wyatt's condition stabilized, but his mind remained a locked vault. Diane spent hours by his side, reading old letters the brothers had written during hunting trips, hoping to jog his memory. "You're safe now," she'd whisper. But Wyatt's eyes stayed distant, fixed on some unseen horror. When Cole showed him the bootlace, Wyatt's fingers twitched as if reaching for a memory, but he said nothing. The psych consult warned that pushing too hard could break him. Cole, frustrated but patient, shifted focus to the science. The blood samples were sent to the Montana State Crime Lab in Missoula. The unknown DNA wasn't in any database, ruling out a known criminal. Soil traces on the bullet casing matched Widow's Draw, confirming it hadn't traveled far. But the casing's condition, tarnished yet not corroded, suggested it had been sheltered, perhaps in the cave, until recently disturbed. Cole's team theorized a storm, like the one that had washed out trails in spring 2013, might have shifted debris, exposing the casing. This led to a new question. What else was out there, waiting to be uncovered? The search expanded with hydrologists brought in to map flood paths from Widow's Draw. Using LiDAR data, they traced streams that could have carried evidence downstream during heavy rains. One path led to a narrow gorge, a choke point where debris often piled up. On October 20th, 2013, a volunteer spotted something glinting in the creek bed. A rusted rifle scope, its lens cracked but recognizable as a model Levi favored. The scope was wedged between rocks, as if deposited by water. Nearby, half submerged in mud, was a shredded orange vest, identical to the one found years earlier. The discoveries were a gut punch. Cole radioed for forensics, his voice tight. The scope and vest were tagged, but the gorge was too unstable for a full search that day. Diane, shown photos, clutched the image of the vest, her voice breaking. That's Tucker's. He always tore his at the hem. The lab confirmed the vest's fabric matched the earlier scrap, linking the finds to the brothers. But the scope held a chilling detail. A single human hair, dark and coarse, caught in its mounting. It wasn't Wyatt's. DNA testing was expedited, and the hair matched the unknown blood from the cave. Someone else had been with the brothers, someone who left traces but no name. Cole's mind raced. Poachers? A drifter? A local who knew these woods? The Bitterroot was a haven for loners, some harmless, some not. Park records from 2008 noted a string of illegal camps near Widow's Draw, linked to a man known only as Red for his faded red cap. He'd been cited for trapping without a permit, but vanished before rangers could follow up. Cole dug into old reports, finding a grainy photo of Red, mid-40s, bearded, eyes shadowed under that cap. Could he be the man in the dark Wyatt feared? The investigation turned to tracking Red, a ghost who left no paper trail. Meanwhile, Wyatt began to speak in fragments. One night, as Diane read him a letter from Nolan, he grabbed her wrist. "The fire," he rasped. "He came from the fire." Cole, present for the outburst, leaned in. "Who, Wyatt? Who came?" But Wyatt's jaw clamped shut, his body shaking. The mention of fire sparked a new lead. Rangers scoured records for reports of unauthorized campfires in 2008. One stood out, a small blaze in Widow's Draw, spotted by a flyover, but extinguished by rain before rangers reached it. The site was never fully investigated, until now. Cole's team hiked to the coordinates, a clearing ringed by blackened stones. Buried in the ash was a metal button, engraved with a deer antler, the kind found on hunting jackets. It wasn't the brothers. The button was bagged, and the area gridded. As dusk fell, Marla Hensley found a shallow trench, barely visible under pine needles. It was too regular to be natural, about 6 feet long. Cole's heart sank. He called for shovels, his voice low. The team dug carefully, the forest silent except for the scrape of metal on earth. At 2 feet down, they hit something hard, a human femur, yellowed but intact. The trench held the remains of one person, later identified by dental records as Nolan Carver. His skull showed a single clean fracture, as if struck with force. The button, the hair, the blood, all pointed to a stranger in the brothers' final moments. Wyatt's secret was no longer just his. It was a crime. If this mystery has you on edge, hit that like button and subscribe to follow the unraveling truth. Let's uncover what really happened. The discovery of Nolan's remains in Widow's Draw turned the Bitterroot mystery into a crime scene, the air heavy with the weight of betrayal. Ranger Cole Ramsey stood over the shallow trench, his flashlight illuminating the stark white of bone against dark earth. The femur and fractured skull told a story of violence, not accident. Nolan, the quiet tracker who could read the forest like a book, hadn't died from a fall or exposure. Someone had ended his life. The antler button, alien to the brothers' gear, was a glaring clue, a stranger's mark in a family's tragedy. Cole's team worked through the night. their breath fogging in the October chill as forensics photographed every inch of the grave. The soil held no other bones, no trace of Levi or Tucker. Diane, informed by phone, collapsed into a chair, her voice a whisper. "Nolan, my boy." She begged to know about the others, but Cole had no answers, only questions. The button was sent to the lab, its deer antler engraving traced to a local brand sold in Missoula hunting shops. Dozens of jackets used it, but it was a start. The hair and blood, still unidentified, pointed to the same unknown figure. Cole's focus zeroed in on Red, the elusive figure from 2008 park records. Old reports described him as a loner, maybe ex-military, living off the grid. His campfire in Widow's Draw, doused by rain, was a mile from Nolan's grave. Was Red the man in the dark Wyatt feared? At the hospital, Wyatt's condition worsened. Feverish and agitated, he muttered about the deal and the fire's edge. Diane, clutching his hand, caught a new fragment. He wanted the rifle. Cole pressed gently, showing Wyatt the button's photo. Wyatt's eyes widened, his breath hitching. "He wore it," he rasped, then fell silent, trembling. Cole didn't push. Wyatt was teetering on collapse. Instead, he chased the lead. The rifle scope, the bullet casing, the button, all suggested a confrontation. Had the brothers stumbled on Red's camp, sparking a deadly clash? The lab rushed analysis on the button, finding microscopic traces of ash matching the 2008 campfire. Red was no longer a ghost. He was a suspect. Cole's team canvassed Missoula, showing Red's grainy photo to hunters and shopkeepers. A gas station clerk remembered a man in a red cap buying ammo in fall 2008, paying cash, his truck loaded with traps. "Looked like he lived in the woods," the clerk said. The truck's description, a beat-up green Chevy, matched a vehicle cited for parking violations near Widow's Draw. Cole traced the plate, long expired, to a Silas Boon, 47, no known address. Boon had a record: petty theft, poaching citations, and a dropped assault charge from 2006. His last sighting was spring 2009, when he sold a rifle at a pawn shop and vanished. Cole's gut told him Boon was Red, and the brothers had crossed his path. The investigation shifted to finding Boon. Rangers searched old trapper haunts while TBI agents checked records in Idaho and Wyoming, where loners like Boon often drifted. Meanwhile, the cave yielded another clue: a shard of glass, buried near the blanket from a cheap whiskey bottle. Its label, partially intact, matched a brand sold in Bitterroot dives. Cole visited a bar in Darby, showing the shard. The bartender nodded. Guys like Red drank that stuff, lived out there trapping, hiding from something. The pieces were aligning, but Levi and Tucker remained missing. Cole's team returned to Widow's Draw, using flood maps to search downstream. On October 25, 2013, a ranger found a second trench, smaller, hidden under a fallen log. It held Levi's remains, identified by a watch Diane gave him for his 21st birthday. His ribs showed knife wounds, clean and deep. The brutality stunned Cole. 2 brothers dead, killed by force. Tucker's absence was a gaping wound. Where was he? Diane, shown Levi's watch, wept silently, her hope for Tucker now a fragile thread. Wyatt, when told of Levi's fate, broke down, sobbing, "I couldn't stop him." Cole sat across from him, voice low. "Who, Wyatt? Tell me." Wyatt's eyes darted, his voice a whisper. "Silas. He said he'd let us go." The name hit like a bullet. Silas Boon. Wyatt's story spilled out in fragments. The brothers had found Boon's camp, a hidden lean-to with traps and a fire. Boon, paranoid and armed, thought they were after his haul. Poached furs worth thousands. An argument turned deadly. Nolan was struck first, a rock to the head. Levi fought back but was knifed. Wyatt and Tucker, bound in the cave, faced a choice: stay and die, or make a deal. Boon wanted their rifles, their silence. Wyatt's voice cracked. "I swore we'd say nothing." He took Tucker. Cole's blood ran cold. Tucker might still be alive, or dead in another unmarked grave. The search for Boon intensified, his name now a beacon. TBI agents found a lead, a 2011 sighting of a green Chevy in a Wyoming trailer park. Cole's team prepared to move, but Wyatt's final words haunted him. He's still out there, watching. The Bitterroot was no longer just a wilderness. It was a hunter's ground, and Boon was the predator. The truth was close, but it came at a cost Diane could barely bear. The name Silas Boon turned the Bitterroot case into a manhunt, the forest's secrets unraveling with each new lead. Ranger Cole Ramsey stood in the command post, maps and photos pinned to a board, Silas's grainy 2008 image at the center. The weathered face, shadowed by the red cap, seemed to mock the investigation. Wyatt's broken confession, that Boon had killed Nolan and Levi, taken Tucker and spared him for silence, lit a fire under the team. The question wasn't just where Boon was, but whether Tucker was still alive. Diane Carver, hollowed by grief for Nolan and Levi, clung to that fragile hope, her eyes searching Cole's for any sign of her youngest son. Wyatt's health stabilized, but his mind remained a minefield. He spoke of the cave, the fire, Boon's cold eyes, and a deal that saved his life but cost his brothers. "He made me swear," Wyatt whispered during one session, his hands twisting the hospital blanket. "Said he'd find me if I talked." Cole noted the fear, not of a memory, but of a threat still alive. The Wyoming lead, a green Chevy spotted in a trailer park in 2011, was their best shot. TBI agents and Cole headed to Rock Springs, a dusty town where loners like Boon could blend in. The trailer park, a sprawl of rusted mobile homes, yielded a witness, an old woman who remembered a man in a red cap, quiet, always armed. "Called himself Silas," she said. "Left after a fight, maybe 12. He'd traded furs for cash, then vanished. A search of the lot turned up a discarded knife sheath, its stitching matching the antler button style. It was Boon's, no doubt." Back in Montana, the Bitterroot search zeroed in on Boon's old haunts. Rangers revisited Widow's Draw, combing for Tucker's traces. On October 30th, 2013, a dog team caught a scent near a dry creek bed, a mile from Levi's grave. Digging revealed a third trench, but it was empty, disturbed as if someone had moved its contents. Soil samples showed traces of blood, too degraded for DNA, but the size of the trench matched Tucker's frame. Cole's heart sank. Boon might have covered his tracks. Diane, shown the photos, clutched Tucker's old jacket, her voice fierce. "He's out there. I know it." Cole nodded, hiding his doubt. The empty trench felt like a taunt, Boon's way of staying one step ahead. The investigation traced Boon's movements through pawnshop records. In 2012, he'd sold a rifle in Idaho, its serial number matching Tucker's. The shopkeeper described a man with scars on his hands, a detail Wyatt hadn't mentioned. Cole returned to the hospital, showing Wyatt a sketch of Boon. Wyatt's reaction was visceral. He vomited, shaking. "That's him," he gasped. "He kept us in the dark, said the mountains would hide it all." Wyatt's story clarified. Boon had forced them to his camp, paranoid they'd report his poaching. Nolan's defiance led to his death. Levi's fight ended in a knife. Tucker and Wyatt, bound, were leverage. Boon took Tucker as insurance, leaving Wyatt with a warning: speak and die. Wyatt, injured and terrified, hid in the cave for years, scavenging, haunted by his brother's fate. Cole's team followed the rifle lead to Idaho, finding a cabin Boon had rented in 2013. It was abandoned, but inside was a map with Widow's Draw circled, a chilling confirmation. A hidden compartment held a photo. Boon, red cap faded, standing with a young man whose build matched Tucker's. The image, dated 2012, sent Diane into a spiral of hope and fear. Was Tucker alive, held captive, or worse? The search for Boon became a race. TBI agents tracked a 2013 sighting in Oregon, where a man matching Boon's description worked as a trapper. On November 5, 2013, Cole's team raided a remote cabin near the Rogue River. Boon wasn't there, but the cabin held traps, furs, and a journal. Its pages detailed the brothers and a debt paid in blood. One entry read, "The kid's useful, but he knows too much." Cole's blood ran cold. Tucker. The journal mentioned a second hideout, deep in the Bitterroot, a place Boon called the Vault. Rangers mobilized, targeting a remote ridge. On November 8th, they found it, a camouflaged bunker dug into a cliff. Inside were Tucker's boots, his initials carved inside. But no body. A trapdoor led to a cache of furs and a blood-stained knife, its blade matching Levi's wounds. Boon was gone, but Tucker's boots suggested he'd been alive recently. Diane, shown the boots, wept with relief and dread. Cole vowed to find Boon. On November 10th, a tip came from a Montana hunter, a man in a red cap, seen near the Idaho border. Cole's team moved in, finding Boon at a campfire. He didn't resist, his eyes cold as he was cuffed. In interrogation, Boon confessed. He'd killed Nolan and Levi, kept Tucker as a laborer for his poaching. Tucker escaped in 2013, but Boon claimed he'd died in the wild. Cole didn't buy it. Diane, hearing the news, refused to give up. Tucker was out there, she insisted. The case was solved, but for Diane, a new journey began, finding her last son in a wilderness that still held secrets. If this story gripped you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of survival and truth. Let's keep searching for answers.